Hey, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm so excited that you're all here. I'm Allison Delacruz, and I'll be your host today for this afternoon conversation, or maybe morning, depending where you are in the world. How's it? A Q&A about Linda Mabalot and her work, her film work that we're sharing through the Los Angeles Asian Pacific Film Festival, produced by Visual Communications. We want to say Happy Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, or Happy Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And we want to welcome you to the first ever Los Angeles Asian Pacific Film Festival virtual showcase presented by Visual Communications. From celebrating our histories and cultures to mobilizing our communities to be socially and politically active, we present the virtual showcase to keep us connected. Today, this showcase is brought to you by Comcast, NBC Universal, Sony Pictures Entertainment, Nielsen, HBO and Warner Media, National Geographic. And as always, for more information, please visit vcmedia.org. We want to say thank you to our sponsors who have supported Visual Communications' archive program. Special thank you to the Aratani Foundation, the California Civil Liberties Public Education Program, the National Film Preservation Foundation, the Department of Cultural Affairs, Los Angeles, the California Arts Council, the California Council for the Humanities, the Historical Cultural Neighborhood Council, Sustainable Little Tokyo, and Little Tokyo Service Centers Plus Lab. We also want to say thank you to the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture. We're so excited that name got changed. Full-fledged department in the county, hey, hey. So thank you to the LA County Department of Arts and Culture, as well as UCLA's Community Archives Lab, supported by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, who support both VC's archive interns, throughout the year. So tonight we're gathered for our Monday Night VC HOWZIT. We want to celebrate Linda Mabalot, her films, her resilient leadership, and her commitment to multicultural collaboration. And just before I bring folks in, we have an amazing panel gathered. I want to invite folks just to ground yourself wherever you are. We're about to remember a little, we're about to learn a little. And for folks who know me, you know I'm about the grounding and the breath. So I want to invite you to sit as tall as you can, let your spine elongate, feel your feet on the floor, and just go ahead and take a breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. Dope. I'm so blessed to be moderating today's panel. I'm a young blood, as named by Linda. I met her in the late 90s through my work with the Festival of Philippine Arts and Culture. I also became a VC family member pretty quick. I've had the blessing of making a short film with my sister that we participated in Fast Forward with. And as I was telling some folks in the room prepping, I also helped to serve as the writer, narrator, and associate producer of Linda's last film, Grassroots Rising, directed by Robert Wynn, produced by Visual Communications. So I'm honored to be here today as the Youngblood rep. But as you're going to see, we're going to talk a little bit about why these films from the 70s and 80s matter and how we can think about them in this contemporary context with so much social justice issues staring us in the face, and the kind of different access to technology. So I want to talk about Linda's films and welcome folks into this work, into this room. And so I'm going to ask my friends in the digital control room to go ahead and bring our panelists into the room. I want to say welcome to Abe Ferrer. Abe Ferrer is the Archives and Distribution Manager at Visual Communications. The VC Archives serve as an integral part of VC's documentary-based production activities, and they've documented various Asian American social movements and communities in California. Abe was also involved with the production and fabrication of museum and site-specific exhibitions, including At First Light, The Dawning of Asian Pacific America, co-produced by the Japanese American National Museum. Abe, do you want to give us a wave so folks know who you are? Yay. Awesome. Up next, I want to welcome Antonio de Castro, all the way from Quezon City in the Philippines. Antonio and his family immigrated to the US in 1958. His father was in the US Navy during World War II. They moved to naval bases in California and finally settled in San Diego. He grew up and eventually became a master's student at UC Irvine's Comparative Cultures and finished in 1974. On his journey, he co-produced You Can Still Hear Me Sing with Linda Mabalot, which hopefully everybody's had a chance to watch before today's program. If not, you can still watch it after this program. Antonio, you want to give us a wave so folks know who you are? Yay, welcome. We're doing mini waves today. Also joining us on the panel, so super excited, one of Linda's roommates and comadres, Janice D. Tanaka, is a producer, director, and television executive with 30 years of experience in producing films, television, corporate media, and educational videos for organization in the Asian American community. And prior, she also spent some time at Fox as a manager of diversity development. And prior to Fox, she produced over 100 episodes for television that presented positive images of Asian Americans for the International Channel and ASEAN Television. Welcome, Janice. Want to give a wave so everybody knows who you are? Awesome. And last but certainly not least, the man with the upright bass who keeps the rhythm thumping. I want to give what's up and shouts out to Taiji Miyagawa. Taiji has collaborated with Asian American artists, including the late composer pianist Glenn Horiuchi, the band Hiroshima, Philip Kangotanda, Lawson Inada, and Nobuko Miyamoto. He is currently the bassist for the Crenshaw bass quartet, Los Acatombros. Taiji, you want to give us a wave and say hello? Awesome.
Hello, everybody.
Yay. So I want to welcome everybody, and I want to start a little with Manong and then make our way through down the list as we were allowed to see it in the VC Virtual Showcase. I want to talk then a little bit about You Can Still Hear Me Singing, as well as the Apsu film. So I want to start with you, Janice. If you could just talk a little bit about Manong and kind of where Linda was at in the making of that film at the time, as you remember, and what that process was like.
Well, I think I remember that Linda had come from Northern California. And at that point in time, there were a lot of migrations between Southern California and Northern California. So Eddie Wong had met her in a meeting in San Francisco or in Sacramento, somewhere up north. And then he just brought her in saying, well, this is our new Filipino co-director, Linda Mabalot, who's going to help you with the film. And I said, oh, okay, this will be interesting. At that point in time, VC had a large grant to do a series of, I believe, 5 different ethnic groups. So we did Filipino, Japanese, Chinese, Samoan, and Korean. No, maybe it was 4. So at that point in time, we were kind of all divvying up as VC staff to figure out which ethnic group we would work with. And Chris Yamashita took on the directorship of Samsara, the Japanese piece. And so I thought, well, yeah, I'll work on the Filipino project because I don't know much, but I love history. I love finding out about different Asian American stories. And this was all the process in the 80s of the discovery of what ethnic studies meant and who we were as people. And it was really important that VC was collecting those stories early on. Plus, video had just come on the horizon. So here we were with this 30-pound video recorder and a 30-pound camera with a wire in between, lugging it all around town. But so when I first met Linda, it was just like the big grin and smile and the cigarette and how's it? And we hit it off right away. I don't know many Japanese Americans who are Catholic, and my family happened to be Catholic, so we bonded on in nomine Padre Spiritu Santo, Amen. And so she always would do that. And she came from a very modest background, and unlike a lot of people at VC at the time who were upper middle class or middle class guys, Linda really had heart and soul for the farm worker, for the poor, for the underserved, and I bonded with her immediately during that time.
Awesome, thank you. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about, I noticed in watching the film, just kind of how much access she had to the Manongs and how much trust. I think one of my favorite scenes after I got to rewatch it for this panel one of my, I love the whole film, but I think there's something about that closing scene when you're at Agbayani village and we're hearing these this one manong in particular is just expressing gratitude that people are even paying attention. And if you haven't seen it, check the hat game, the manong hat game, and the Agbayani village scene is on. And I certainly love that kind of acoustic version of Prophets Enslave the World, which is a Philip Veracruz poem. But I think that's the thing that struck me is just, you know, having been in historic Filipino town here in LA in the 90s and remembering that the McDonald's on the corner of Alvarado and Temple is where a lot of these manongs would hang out, you know? And I just remember thinking, gosh, a lot of these guys are gone now. And so such a treasure to hear these stories directly from them at the point in their life when she got to interview them. Can you tell me a little bit about what you might remember in terms of, how, because she cared about the people, is that why you think she got access? Did she have somebody who, you know, did she have gatekeepers who were able to say to folks like, she's cool, like you need to let her talk to you? Because I think that's a struggle that documentarians are still having today. How do you gain trust with folks when a story might be fragile?
You know, I don't recall having any trouble at all. FACLA was I think it was Filipino. Do you remember what the acronym was?
Filipino American Community of Los Angeles. Yes, FACLA.
Mm-hmm. Was the senior center at that point in time, and people were going there to dance as well as to have a hot meal. And they were very kind, and they just said, come on in and just meet whoever it is, because I think the people there really thought that their story was important also. Mm-hmm. And I think they were just happy to have new dance partners. And you know, Linda first introduced me to, you know, all these men, and she said, go dance. And I have 2 left feet. And I was like so out of my element because I had never done ballroom dancing. I mean, our time was, you know, just hopping on the rock beats at the dances. So it was so funny. I remember flying on the circle, circulating around, and 2 left feet. I'm going, I can't dance. I'm so sorry. I'm going to step on your foot. But they were really, really kind, and they were really anxious, I think, to talk about who they were. There was another room where I think there was gambling going on, so we didn't bother those guys because they kind of gave us the stink eye. But the dancers surely were the life of the party. And I couldn't believe it. They had live bands, they had slacky guitars, they had singers. And I said, this is really cool live music. So it was all new to me, but then we would go, I made a note, right, to mention Traveler's Cafe and my eating dinuguan and just kind of enjoying the culture of that street. And it was pretty amazing back then. And I think the community was really tight. I think SIPA was just starting to deal with, you know, some of the youth problems in the neighborhood, but certainly FACLA was the place to go. So it was very fun.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think for folks who are pop culture mavens, I think what you're seeing in Manong is the actual real life version of the artistic adaptation of what they're doing in Apple Diap's Bebot video. So I'm also dating myself in a generation by referencing the Bebot video, but I'm going to go there. So I do think I appreciate this through line of connection that kind of resonates throughout the film, like this capturing of a history that could be lost, the telling of a truth that really requires a certain amount of honesty. And I think with that, I want to transition to Antonio, because I do really feel like the You Can Still Hear Me Singing video, that piece really resonated in terms of this transnational connection that I think Philams feel about what's happening in the Philippines even now. But even to see it happening back then, to see communities having to harvest trash and knowing that that's still a part of our community legacy and trying to really help figure out how to get people fed. Antonio, I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about the process of making that film. Did you and Linda do all the prep before you went to the Philippines, or did you prep in the Philippines? What was that process like? Oh, whoops.
I'm muted.
There you go. You did it.
Okay. I'm okay?
Yep.
Yes, I can hear you.
The segue from Janice and the question of how she was related to the Manongs, because I think Linda was Ilocano. And Ilocano is the region in the north, which is the poorest in the Philippines, and where most of the first wave of to the to the U.S. Came from, were Ilocanos. So I think that's why Janice was able to, Linda was able to relate to them well, because she was Ilocano herself.
Mm-hmm.
Ilocanos are known for being very frugal and very hardworking, and but very poor, but very tough people. And they have the best diet because they eat food that's available, and that's the food that's because they couldn't afford to buy other foods. So they were really healthy. Like Linda was a very hardy person. So I think that's part of her Ilocano background. But in making of the film, I wanted to quote Linda because I knew she had never been to the Philippines and wanted to have her with me to go. And luckily, I was able to get 2 free airline tickets from United Airlines. I just wrote to them and asked for tickets, and fortunately, they gave us 2 business class tickets. And that was the first time we'd ever flown business class. And I just remember when you're buying business class, they give you all the liquor that you want. And they would come in those little bottles, those little tiny miniature bottles. And they would give us, and instead of us drinking it, we'd pocket them. And every time the stewardess would come, we'd always get a new batch. And I don't know why the stewardess never asked where are the empty bottles.
Because she knew Ilocanos want to be frugal.
But it was kind of funny because when we walked off the plane, we're kind of clinking.
Totally.
That was such a low budget film that we did. And I got the free airline ticket. And then I was shooting Super 8 because I couldn't afford to buy a video camera because video cameras at the time were new and they were expensive. And so Super 8 was really cheap because it was sort of going out of style. But then you realize you have to buy film and you process and transfer. But anyway, so I was with Janice Sakamoto at NATA in San Francisco. She helped me get some money to buy Super 8 film. And so that's how we were able to finance it. And then in the Philippines, we just stayed with relatives and friends. And so Linda got to meet some of her relatives for the first time, Ilocanos. And since they were poor, a lot of them were jeepney drivers and laborers. They're really tough guys. And so I took her to my place, which is in Coron, Palawan. And there she was able to ride with me for the first time in a bangka, which is like an outrigger. Mm-hmm. Her, as we were riding on the waves, really large waves, she was screaming and shouting. But even when she was being flirted on by the men and the older men in Coron, and this particularly my uncle would come to the house with flowers for her. But yeah, it was just me and her shooting, and we were able to get connections from the network to be able to go to different places. And it was a particularly dangerous time, which I didn't realize how dangerous, because Marcos had just been overthrown and Corazon Aquino had just become president. And we were traveling, without any idea or certification of this press. So we were just going and sort of blindly into these situations and talking to people who were part of the resistance. And now I'm realizing how dangerous that was.
Mm-hmm. The willfulness of youth, yeah?
Or the ignorance, yeah.
Yeah, or ignorance, I guess, yeah. I think one of the things that struck me was, and this always strikes me when I was back in Manila in last year, and I think for people who have not ever visited the Philippines or been to a country that is deemed third world by other nations, I think there can be a shock about the poverty. And I wonder, like, how, I just don't, yeah, I just wonder, did you have a period of having to get used to the poverty and not cry? I just wonder what that emotional process was as a Filipino to like unearth this. Did it, and I've asked my family who lives in the Philippines, and one of my cousins, she's like, it's here. And I just have been thinking about how we're faced with so much right now in terms of people who are in need. And I wondered, how did you all get through that process of being able to talk to folks? And did you find yourself having feelings while you were interviewing folks about their status or about their safety or about their access to food and shelter and water?
Yeah, my trip with Linda was actually my second trip to the Philippines. So I went to that initial shock for my first trip. And that's why I did a second film, because I wanted people to know. And if you watch the film, it's just, there's no narration. It's basically just showing the situation, because that's what I wanted to do with the film, was just to show the people the situation. You know, I was teaching in San Francisco State, and I know the knowledge of Filipino Americans was very low. And so I just thought that was probably the knowledge of the Filipinos throughout the US. So just to be a portrait of the situation in the Philippines, and to really show how deep the poverty was and how the people were suffering, and the people should know that. That's why the film is like that.
Yeah. And I appreciate that you guide us to that process. And I'm going to connect that to the Bakke decision that happened here in the States in 1978. That seems to be another pivot of just showing people kind of what was happening, giving people something to respond to. And I think that you can still hear me singing, I think offers this connection to something that we hear about in the Apasu film about the Third World Liberation Movement and the founding of ethnic studies at San Francisco State. And just in prep for this panel, part of what we've been talking about is the Bakke decision. For folks who may not know, we're talking about Bakke versus Regents of University of California versus Bakke. And the ruling came down on June 28th, 1978. And that's when essentially the US Supreme Court declared affirmative action constitutional, but did invalidate racial quotas. So we're seeing this shift. It seems to be a catalyst. So I want to invite Taiji or maybe Abe to talk a little bit about that time. I know, Taiji, you were in community with Linda around these movements. I saw some folks in the film who are folks that I know now in community-based work, or I have seen. There are folks in that film who I wonder where, and I wonder this actually about a lot of people from all of these pieces, where are they now, or who are their descendants and where are they, and have they been informed by this legacy? So that's kind of one of my little side thoughts, but I wanted to invite you, Taiji, to just talk a little bit about, that period of time, post-Bakke 78, all the way in which that movement was happening, and kind of how you and Linda connected in that milieu, and what just artist to artist, I feel like you also bring a certain amount of politic, you bring a certain amount of analysis. Was that always connected in your connections to Linda? Is that something you all feel like you developed over time? Because obviously anybody connected to movements, we all grow over time. So I want to ask you, Taiji, to talk a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, basically I met Linda because my first political involvement was in Little Tokyo. And at that time, I mean, you know, when we were talking about life up on Temple, right, with Travelers Cafe and stuff. Well, Little Tokyo was also an actual community where Japanese Americans lived, right, and everything. And at that time, there was a lot of the Japanese economy was doing really good, right? Like they had moved beyond the boys era of the 60s, and now we're a major exporter of cars, right? Like that was the heyday of then called Datsun, and then later became Nissan, Toyota, Mitsubishi, all of that stuff. And they were dumping tons of capital into Little Tokyo, and there was a collusion with them and the city government that was actually causing a lot of displacement of the actual community people, all the low-income housing, people that used to work in Central Foods Market. Basically, it was like the open air farmers market where the produce people worked, right? Or people worked in the flower mart downtown, also workers from the garment industry. I mean, Little Tokyo was a real working class community. That's where people came to after they worked. That's where they bought their groceries and everything. And so Linda, along with Steve Liu, her friend from Sacramento, they had come down, and Linda, I think, was going to school at UC Davis and just needed a change, I guess, of scenery, so to speak. And she somehow heard about Little Tokyo, and I actually met her as another person that was working with the Little Tokyo People's Rights Organization against the redevelopment, displacement of Little Tokyo. So, but in a big picture, I would say that, yeah, with the advent of the Baca decision, that was something that really, you know, if you look at the people's history in the United States from like Asian immigration, going back to early Chinese, Japanese, Filipino labor, right? And then later you go into like the Black Civil Rights Movement, right? The fight for the right to vote, the fight for equal access and things like that with Martin Luther King. And then beyond that, there was, the late 60s anti-war movement into the fight for ethnic studies and us having our stories represented in higher education. Well, if you take that trajectory, right, which actually could go all the way back to resistance of Native people fighting the European invaders and slave rebellion, right? 78 was like kind of another chapter because the Baca decision represented an attempt by the rulers of the country to take back everything that the people had gained in the early 70s. All those fights at San Francisco State for ethnic studies, at Berkeley for free speech, and those things that were all in the mix with the anti-war movement. Well, the Baca decision was basically calling that all into question or challenging that and trying to reverse the gains that we've made by actually saying that, hey, so what if you were locked out of higher education for multiple generations and a few of you snuck in the last few years because of affirmative action? Well, we're going to take that away from you because you're taking limited seats away from white people. That was basically what it was, right? And that didn't sit well with a lot of us. So I think Linda and I, kind of similar to the VC, we weren't part of the first generation of VC, like Bob, Eddie, you know, Dwayne, Alan, and those guys. We were like the next wave. And politically, we weren't the ones that were at the forefront of the original ethnic studies fight. We were on the second generation that came in opposition to defend what the first generation had gained in the 70s, in particular affirmative action, ethnic studies, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the political context for, I think, my work and my background with Linda. I mean, we were basically, you know, partners in crime with that whole student organizing effort. I mean, we met in Little Tokyo, but we were still a student age, and we went back to school and we decided, let's organize Asian students, right? And then that later led kind of full circle for Linda coming back into VC later.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Do you think, what's something that you feel like, I mean, I feel like in watching the film, I got a sense of a little bit of the climate that students were facing. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, do you feel like there might be parallels right now based on what you might have heard from students who are in school today? I think, you know, it's always tenuous when we ask generations to analyze each other, but I think there are some parallels in terms of what students are seeking right now. Obviously, we're thinking about access to education. I was on a call with some educators over the weekend, and they were saying in local public schools here in LA, like this one teacher was saying 40% of his students don't have access to computers. So they're not having same access to learning right now. And as we think about our contemporary environment, I think I just wonder, like, and I'm curious about what students are, how they're organizing, how they're doing, because it's everything is so different right now. But I'm wondering if you've just felt any echoes or if you've heard things from young people today that feel like, yeah, or am I just trying to make a loose?
Well, yeah, no, I think there's echoes, but to me, one of the biggest changes that paradoxically, in a way, because of the fact that there were gains with affirmative action, because there are larger numbers of some Asians that have been able to make it into the quote unquote professional classes, right? And then, I mean, I think, I don't have the statistics, but to me, it seems like there are a higher percentage of Asian students that, like, from a middle class background, or something closer to middle class background have gone into school. So when we talk about access problems and things like that, we have to talk about the class issue within our communities, right? Because it's mostly the working class Asians that they don't have internet, they can't log onto the Zoom, remote education, distance learning thing, that sort of thing. So I think it's an important thing to say because, like, for example, I have problems with the term that a lot of people use, which is diversity, right? So they think, of course I agree that there should be more brown, yellow, black, faces represented in different professions and politics and positions of relative power, right? But the problem with that word is that it narrows what the demand is for our whole community, and it leaves out people from the conversation, right? And it starts getting into this whole thing about, hey, I'm qualified, I went to school, so I should be able to get access. But then it's you see what I mean? It narrows the conversation, and Linda was really clear about that, because what we used to raise was the demand for full equality, which is a totally different thing. When we talk about full equality, we're talking about everybody, right? I mean, it's not like on every level of society you can see inequality. Like working class white people, they have some privileges that working class people of color don't have, right? And then it goes on up the food chain where there's none of this at the very top, So I think a lot of the issues of access and stuff are the same, but most.
Oh, Taiji, I just lost your audio at the very end, but I'm going to summarize because I actually need to transition us. But what I heard you say is the issues of access are still the same, but I also appreciate you de-aggregating for us this assumption that the Asian and Pacific American, or the Asian American, Pacific Islander, South Asian, Southeast Asian, Native Hawaiian communities, that we're actually some kind of monolithic group. And I think a lot of what we're talking about right now is trying to de-aggregate data, to look at our diversity and to acknowledge class, to acknowledge intersectionality, how we enter the country, how we come up, and then, what is our access to things? So I really appreciate you surfacing that. In this next couple of minutes, I want to turn to Abe a little. And, I think one of the unique positions you have on this panel is you not only connected to Linda, but you were able to work with her in the formal function of VC for so many years. And I think a couple of us have been talking about, I was talking to some friends about who would Linda have been if she had not, who would she have become as a filmmaker if she had not chosen to step up for VC? And I think we're all grateful for her, and I honor that path for her. But I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, in your connection to Linda, as you saw her juggling these issues around access and her desire to create more stories for community. What are some of your thoughts about that idea? Do you think that she, and I'm sure I could ask this to everybody, but in those days, was she sad that was she struggling because sometimes I struggle as a producer because I'm not making my own art. I'm super happy to make art for other people and with other people and to get their vision out. But but I also have to check in about that. And I wonder, is that part of the dialogue, or was Linda just so clear, like, this is the next way she's going to establish access, or this is the next way to move the movement forward?
I see. Well, when I started, at VC, this is like in the mid '80s, what have you. I think that visual communications had basically done two things. One is that it executed a sea change from a largely all boys club. Admittedly, the visual communications of the 1970s was an organization that was essentially run by 4 cowboys. If it wasn't, for people like Betty Chen and Patricia Lau, and later Janice and Linda working there and stuff, I'm sure it would have been like pretty insufferable. By the time that I came to VC, that whole environment had changed. The 2 Bay Area girls, Linda, from Sacramento, and Nancy Araki had come in, and they were essentially like running everything. And I think that I jumped on at a point in time where Linda had basically worked with Nancy to engineer a complete change of the organization from being a filmmakers cooperative, in which there would be like essentially like feast and famine periods, because like you're producing films and you're not producing films, you know, you're employed and then you go on unemployment, you know, to a full service media art center where we you know, basically take stock of and utilize and activate all the assets, you know, that we've accrued over the years and, you know, what have you. And I think that one of the things is that, you know, although Linda was a person who, for her entire time as an executive director, never had a set of formal hiring policies, you know, her staff all the way until the day she died was essentially all handpicked and all selected, not on like resumes or whatever, but on intuition. So, you know, these are things that, you know, that would not happen in most arts organizations these days. But I think that one of the things was that, you know, she had a very good way of judging people's character and essentially taking on, you know, quote unquote projects, you know, and stuff, and really, you know, making them shine. I don't know if this predates Linda, but, you know, back in the day, you know, visual communications took in a 17-year-old, you know, high school dropout named Stan Nakazono, and years later, you know, he became a very accomplished filmmaker and was in fact the producer and co-director of the OPSU Education as a Right video. You know, they basically like, you know, did all the shooting and, you know, and what have you. 10 years later, one of her colleagues who was part of the Asian Pacific American Heritage Committee asked her to take in a project for her. She had like a little 19-year-old cousin from Toronto who was basically like all really bored at summer school at UCLA, and, you know, could we, you know, take him in and, you know, and give him something to do that would bring structure to his life. And Linda said, sure. And then into the door walked Quentin Lee, and like visual communications was never the same. So basically it was like a whole lot of things, you know, like that and stuff. And I think that it also, you know, colored the kind of approach, you know, that she took to filmmaking and what have you over the years. You know, a lot of people who were involved with community-based cinema, you know, were, you know, rolling through the doors, and the people who remained from the old VC at the time, you know, which included, you know, people like John Asaki and Amy Kato, and then Kaz Takeuchi, who was our darkroom technician, you know, really kept the doors open while we were working to erase some massive production debt, you know, and whatnot. So, like, I think that she was, you know, very instrumental, you know, in that, and very instrumental in bringing in people, you know, who had different things to say, but were very valuable, even as, you know, the direction of Asian American cinema started transitioning over from nonfiction, community-based media to narrative filmmaking and long-form narratives that would allow our community of makers to be competitive and even successful in a mainstream marketplace. So I take a look at this transition of people that she, you know, identified and supported, from Supachai Strongsin to Carlos Avila to Jean Kahayan and Justin Lin and folks like them. And I think that, yeah, you know, she really, you know, went on a very intuitive kind of a thing in terms of like trusting people and trusting their artistic instincts, and, you know, trusting that, you know, whatever they do, you know, their perspective stayed grounded in community, and, you know, not go all high concept or what have you, that, you know, that, you know, Asian American and Pacific Islander cinema becomes this animal that we, you know, don't even recognize anymore. So I think that that was, you know, a very, you know, impactful way in terms of how she ran the whole ship, and how she, you know, had this effect on the entirety of the Asian Pacific American cinema community.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that also makes me feel deeply honored that I got into that little selection pool for the little parts that I did. I'm super grateful, you know, and I know it is actually a part of my Kuleana right now to find the youngins right now and try to And I think about that. And Abe, you know, you invoked some really great names. So I want to also add to this conversation some more friends of Linda. We have a couple of folks who are about to join us.
Sure. Bring them on. Bring them on. You know, I wanted to add too that, you know, Linda also came up through the time, you know, we were talking about Baki, and we were talking about, you know, many of us in the UC system, you know, came in through like the EOP programs and you know, what have you. I see, you know, one of Linda's fellow EOP students at UC Davis, David Magdale, here on the line, and you know, what have you. But at the same time, you know, it's kind of important to note that, you know, we're really talking about and celebrating, you know, Linda and her spirit and what have you. But, you know, there's like a lot of other folks, you know, who were with her here at the time that I think, you know, was just as impactful. And I think that they were like really like partners in crime of hers that really made this place go, you know, like Steve Tatsikawa, you know, who, you know, was, you know, an executive director in the 80s. And then, you know, some of her colleagues and partners, you know, including Gabriel Kubos, Charlotte Murakami, Jose de Vega, John Rear, you know, Mario Valdez, and a whole bunch of, you know, other people who sadly are no longer with us. But, you know, when you take a look at the totality of what they have done, you know, in concert with Linda, and in terms of like how they blaze their own trail. And when we talk about, you know, those people that we consider to be our ancestors, you know, like the Lonnie Dings of the world, like this, like Stephen Nings, the James Yees, the Janice Sakamotos, and what have you. You know, really, Linda was part of this very, very large community that really, you know, influenced, affected, and you know, colored, you know, the way that, you know, we go about living our lives and making media that really matters to people.
Totally.
And you know, and what have you.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that it gets really important, you know, to take a look at, you know, her impact in this context.
Great. So I want to help us do that. We have some other friends who join us. Thank you. Transition and impact. I want to say welcome to David Magdale and Amy Kato and John Isaki, who are here. I saw Walt Louis floating around. I don't know if you're in my spread right now, but Walt was here as well. So I want to welcome John and Amy and David into this conversation as we talk about Linda and the cadre of folks that she was really surrounded by. And I think today's panel is really also testament to that as we think about all the folks who are involved, because making a film is not a solo project. So I wanted to see David or Amy or John, do you want to share some more thoughts with us about Linda? I think we're on this, I think you can hear kind of the tip we're on, but yeah, what are some of the lessons that we need to remember from her? Or what are the things that you feel like maybe folks who don't know her, I'm hoping folks meet her through these films to get a sense of the legacy that she left us and that you all are keeping alive and vibrant. So I want to pass to David or Amy or John.
I'll go ahead and go first. This is David. And, you know, it's interesting that, you know, we're here, we're celebrating her, and, you know, listening to everyone before. It's exactly who she is and who she was. I met her at Davis when we were at UC Davis when we were like youngsters, and she was like two years older than me and her and Laura Cabanero. We would just get together as Filipinos at UC Davis and just crack up, just laugh all day. But also the activism was always there because we were always like supporting Asian American studies because ethnic studies was so important. So I'm looking at this as like, what do you think about Linda today in 2020? Where would she be? This is the moment that I think she and a lot of us back in the day have been waiting for and have been living for. This is this movement that's going on. Walt and I have been talking about this. I look at like this week, we had Asian Americans, 5-part series on PBS. Yes, it's like, it's the tip of the iceberg. Country music gets 16 hours, we get 5, but it's a start. She would be right up in there and really supportive of this movement with all these young bloods, as she would call them, who are taking the torch from early on, from what she tried to do with visual communications and really to instill all the artists to tell our stories, is exactly where she would be. You know, and that was like the excitement thing for all of us. What I loved about being around in her space was not only her love for the community, love for the art, but she understood what all that meant. She understood what the future would be. She understood what the digital movement is now. She did a blueprint for VC and where we would fit in the digital arena where we are now. And it's interesting now where everything's come full circle, where VC and all these other Asian American media resource centers are utilizing whatever comes to them that we can use in the whole digital movement that we're in right now in terms of propelling our stories, propelling our art. And so she was always that influence and always that inspiration, you know, and it was sad when we lost her, but I remember being at her side prior to, like, the week before we had lost her. And her last thing to me was like, we have to make sure that our stories are told, that we keep giving up and keep growing our own in terms of, like, you know, inspiring these new young bloods, as she would call it, to come through and come and, you know, tell the stories. And so I look now in 2020 and where we are, and I could just feel her spirit. I mean, this whole week is all about, has been that with this virtual, we're doing this virtual thing. That would have been like what her, you know, response would have been to COVID. What do we do? Well, we don't just rest and stay, you know, in lockdown, but we do what we do. So it's amazing looking at everybody that's on this panel with Abe and Taiji and Walt and John and Amy and Janice, but everybody who's in this room, I can tell the folks that are in there, that we're celebrating this woman, we're celebrating this activist, because we would go down Soul Train lines back in the day when we were at UC Davis, and we would always be like screaming out like "Power to the People" or "Maki Baka, Huwag Mataka." We'd always be like in the thing. So you had a sense of, because Linda was about the activism, and she was always about like community, but she was also about the party. So it all came together, you know. So it wasn't just like this was about the party, but the party was all about everything. So if you take a look at everybody that's in this room, we were all invited, and the party was, and she was the one that would invite us to the party. And I think this is the moment. And so I'm just like happy to be here to celebrate and just add to this, because I think everyone that she touched really, it's really where this is now. And you can see this is the movement. This is the moment that we've been waiting for, where we're living.
Thank you. And I want to keep on going with the party people. I know we're going to end this panel shortly, but I want to make sure we get everybody in. John and Amy, and then I see Walt did join us. So I want to invite John and Amy, and then Walt, I have a question for you about Golden Thunder and the compilation you were able to do for us. John, Amy, how are you all? What else do you want to bring about Linda to the room?
Now, oops, what?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, talking about when the internet first came up and how excited she was about, she kept on referring to the what is it called?
The information
superhighway. And that, you know, and then she predicted that, you know, when the email first came out, she was just so excited. She would email me in my room, and I would sit there and go, why did you just talk to me? But then she did predict that eventually, you know, we'll be able to download videos and see them online, and you know, I'm sitting there skeptical going, okay, Linda, but she was really excited about the new platforms that were coming up. And I think if she was around now, she'd be, you know, waving a finger at us and saying, I told you so, you know, and through us, you know, she taught us a lot about Filipino history, and I was introduced to Spam for the first time from her. And, you know, I think, you know, if she was around, she'd be in awe of what's happening in the Asian American community, but also what's happening in film and video.
Cool.
Well, it's, I was thinking right before coming on that it was 40 years ago that we first started to work with Linda. That is a huge expanse of time, and we almost forget how difficult the challenge was for Linda at that time, taking over an organization after all the founders had departed, you know, all the leadership, Eddie, Dwayne, Bob Nakamura, they went away, you know, and here's this organization that in the beginning, Linda and Nancy were given the responsibility of continuing on, and all the money had dried up, all that grant money that was in the 70s, that was no longer there. So, you know, you were discussing earlier, if she had the conflict over her own art versus her managerial, directorial responsibilities, I think the pressure was huge to raise money just to keep VC going at that point. So that's, you know, we should be thankful, grateful that during that period, she took an organization that was really facing extinction and somehow found a way to continue. So, I mean, that was her art of keeping VC going. So we have it now for the younger generation of filmmakers. And I think she did it without, you know, she was selfless in that way, you know. She saw the mission of VC and did what she could to keep it moving.
Because it wasn't just the 80s, it's always the 90s. Every decade there was a, you know, funding problems or whatever, but, you know, through perseverance and a positive attitude and trying to, you know, get our creativity
and just being able to inspire the others who came to join the team, you know.
And then getting people like Walt on board and inspiring the staff to keep on going, you know, and Doug and all these, you know, it took, she was able to get that village together to keep us going.
I want to bring Walt into that. And I just want to amplify, like, I think that's what folks, we all need to remember right now, right? Like we are not alone, that we're part of a community, that we can keep inviting people into the circle. And if that there's something that's not right in our world, that we actually have tools. And, you know, hearing Antonio talk about, I couldn't afford the video camera that was 30 pounds, like Janice told us. So I did the Super 8. And just seeing the ways in which we can use technology available. People have more access on phones. You know, it's really exciting to think about what we're able to surface right now at a media level from individual storytellers, given some of the challenges we're facing. So I want to transition and invite Walt Louie into this conversation. Walt, I know you did the compilation for Golden Thunder, which was Linda's narrative feature, which was an adaptation of America Was in the Heart by Carlos Bulosan. So while I know you could talk about that, I also know you could riff on some of your own stories of Linda. So I just want to welcome that into the conversation and invite you, Walt, to share with us some thoughts about Linda.
All right. Thanks, Allison. You know, the point, you hear me, right? Yeah.
Yep.
The point being is that actually Abe had all these archives of dailies and stuff they shot, and they had started filming this film that she had worked on, and it was never finished. There's all these bits and pieces, which was pretty amazing. I mean, because it's all period and everything. And a little bit that if you log on and look at the clips, that's essentially the majority of it, and that we had access to. And I was just trying to put it into some kind of context, but more the fact that, you know, there's so many pieces that Linda had worked on and was involved in and stuff that still lay there unfinished. And so it was just a nice thing to just show the range of the early documentaries that she was so impassioned about. And then, like Antonio says, the whole trip to the Philippines and stuff. I mean, that she was doing on top of, you know, running around trying to keep VC together. I mean, this woman was just manic. I mean, you know, it didn't take much that when you meet her, and I didn't know her as long as all the people on the screen, obviously, but because I came to LA a little bit later, but nonetheless, it didn't take much to just gravitate to her. She had her own kind of airspace. I mean, she had her own kind of environment that just sucked you right in, and there's no escaping that. And you didn't want to escape that. I mean, it was a lot of work whenever you're around her, because she was the hardest working person I ever knew. Mm-hmm. And, you know, in the same way that when I was in the Bay Area and Wani Ding, all these really, at that period, all these really powerful filmmakers, which majority of them were women, which is really Asian women I'm specifically relating to. And so in that way, also that little tribute that I helped put together, I took some pieces that Janice had shot, and then we compiled things because initially, I think I created at least 3 versions over the period of time, because, you know, after her passing, there was a tribute to her, and we played that down at the theater, the Aratani Theater, and we had, you know, live music on stage. And I remember asking people, you know, what music could I use for this? And the original score was the Beatles. What's that called?
In My Life.
In what?
In My Life.
In My Life. Yes, thank you, Abe. Yeah, and that just works so well, and all the lyrics about, you know, someone that has passed and whatnot. It was a really touching piece. And Abe, who was on stage, or maybe Amy can remember, who played?
Oh, it was one of her buddies from back in the day, Randy DeCoscos.
Okay, there you go. See, Abe's got the memory like I don't.
Actually, like, you know, Janice and John and Amy know him.
Our roommate, yeah.
Really, really.
Oh,
well.
really? Okay.
Yeah.
But he was great, and I had cut this video, and then he was going to just, I say, okay, then you can just play this in the background, and he did, and then I said, well, how long's the song? And he says, oh, it's whatever it was, 3.5 minutes. And I said, no, my video is like 4. He says, oh, okay, I'll just repeat the verse, and he did it. I mean, like right there on stage. I mean, this dude was just unbelievable, and you know, it's stuff like that. And okay, my point being is that wherever Linda would allow her presence to be, to touch these people, things just happened. And even with her passing, that continued. And to this day, you know, we can't even think of anything without acknowledging her presence and her influence on each of us, and how it's changed all of us who got to know her. And I think that's the takeaway that I got totally from looking at the footage. It's impregnated there, every frame, every second, you know. And so for that reason, to be able to work with some of her material, it is a pleasure, and it's easy, you know. And then to get people to say a few words about her, if you haven't seen that little tribute video, it just, you know, and all the stills that so well exemplify who she was and how she interacted with people. It's a natural thing. It just, you know, life flows through everything because of her influence.
Yeah. And I think that's a really beautiful way to kind of do one last little loop to some friends. I know we just heard from Abe, so I want to loop back to Janice and Antonio and Taiji. Closing thought about Linda as we wrap up this time celebrating her. I appreciate you, Walt, talking about that tribute video. If you haven't watched it, even if you're in it, I hadn't seen it in a few years, and it moved me to remember a lot. And so I do appreciate the archival process of it, but the power of being able to invoke her spirit and her energy and her life and her light. So I just want to loop back really quick. Janice, final thoughts on Linda?
Well, my virtual background says it all. She had a wonderful downtime, and she always enjoyed a couch and a view and a cigarette and more. And I think about her all the time. You know, what would Linda do in this situation? How would she have handled, you know, this person? You know, she could handle the most difficult personalities, as we know, you know, Quentin and, you know, Stan and, you know, but she did it with such grace and made them feel very good about themselves. So as we're talking, I just am getting tearful, but yes, the couch and the view. That's
Couch and the view. And I also heard you talk about leadership and opportunity there too, bringing people in. Great. Antonio, do you want to share with us final thought on Linda?
To be a part of this remembrance of Linda. And I thought one word that somebody said really fit. I would say that was manic. And that really was fitting. And you asked us about a preparation for the Filipino trip. There was no preparation. We just got on board and sort of intuitively followed our noses. And it's the kind of person that was you would be able to do that with. So thank you for doing this.
Yes, thank you. Taiji, to you.
Well, I want to thank everybody else for all the great words. I think I would say the takeaway that all of us have shared in some of our statements is to have the biggest heart in the whole damn world. And so other people touched on it. In Linda's life, and I think it's something that we could emulate or aspire to, there wasn't, like David was saying, there was no separation between the politics, the partying, the filmmaking, and this mania was because she felt connected to the energy of people all around the world, right? Like you got people right now running the show in this country. It's always trying to narrow down. We only care about this little group here, you know, this bunch of crazy people that doesn't think there's a deadly virus going around. We only care about them, right? Now, Linda was like, if you could go the complete opposite and imagine somebody that had a heart that was big enough to include compassion for every human being on the damn planet, that was who Linda was. And that's why she was so open to like different cultures. That's why she could connect to people, you know, from such a wide range of backgrounds and stuff, even if she wasn't initially familiar with that background, you know. And I think she didn't, other people also said she didn't proceed from her own quote unquote career. She proceeded everything strategically, even tactically, in the interest of the larger, you know, community. And I think that's something also that hopefully people got from tonight and can raise their level, raise their game to that point. It's not just about your individual careers, your, you know, filmmaker path, right? It's about that, of course, and she supported that, but it's that in the context of all of us engaging in these creative activities, you know, whether, and that's creative, whether politics, you know, filmmaking, your personal life, art, the arts, whatever. So big love. That's what I would say the takeaway from Linda was for me.
Yes. And I want to say thank you to everybody. I feel really honored to always be in this company, always to have been connected to Linda. And I feel like part of what I just want to amplify today is I feel like the lessons that we're learning from Linda is that we want to live our holistic self. We want to be authentic. We want to move through our world and discover the things that give us energy and amplify that and put our energy towards that to create the world that we want to see. And I think it's really beautiful that we're having this gathering during this very first virtual showcase, knowing that Linda was thinking about it, knowing that she was visioning. And I want to amplify and support young visionaries, old visionaries, no matter our age. We can each still contribute to what needs to be done in this work. And I'm resonating with what John said about she struggled, but she also wanted VC to keep going. And so really to ask that question and say, she was valuable as a filmmaker, but she was also valuable as a producer and an organizer. And I guess that's the last thing I want to say to folks is everybody's got a role somewhere. A village takes a village, and we cannot front like we can do it all. And I know that's sometimes a model of leadership or process that I've been raised in this larger arts ecosystem. But I want to say, remember, we want to be grounded in our present. Linda's work tells me that all the time. We want to cultivate the stories from the past. What are the lessons that we've lost? What are the knowledge that we need to pass on? And what are the spirit ethereal questions that we need to ask ourselves as artists? Because if we don't ask those, we will not get anywhere. And so the last thing I say is, what Linda taught us is to use every tool to connect different people, because we need to create the more just future, not just for ourselves, not just so I can get mine. But what I love about this story, what I appreciate about visual communications, Linda's definitely seeding and continuing and building of that, all the folks on this panel today, and even the idea of this virtual showcase. We got to get out, and each one's got to reach one, no matter how we can. And we got to see our connections to each other. We need to see our connections to Indigenous, to African American, to Latinx, to Middle Eastern communities, to white communities who want to help tell our stories, so that we're not just going to get, as David mentioned, 16 hours on PBS. That's a great goal. And we are doing that. And we're seeing that in a lot of ways. But who will we be in 4 years? Who are you meeting now? Who from now? Whose work will have amplified yours or connected or saved someone's life or help them to see themselves on screen so they know they are not alone? And that's what Linda reminds me of all time when I heard her voice, when I heard Manong Phillips' voice in Manong. That's what I remember. And I remember Linda's laugh. So as we exit today, I just want to say thank you so much to everybody for joining us. Thank you to Janice Tanaka and Antonio De Castro. Thank you to Abe Ferrer and Taiji Miyagawa, Walt Louis, David Magdael, John Isaki, and Amy Kato. And I just want to remind everybody, if you haven't seen these films, you can check out the showcase and watch them at home. Right now, they've just turned on Daylight Saving, starring Go Nakamura and Ye Ming Chen. You can watch that film now, be our special Thursday, and then come on Thursday and join them for their panel, Pop Dreams and Heartaches. For any of these things, if you want to get involved, if you've been motivated and moved and you want to figure out how to get connected, vcmedia.org is the place to go. As you think about what you need to do with yourself and your folks in the next several months, I invite you personally and always to consider making a donation to Visual Communications when it makes sense, as much as it makes sense, so that we can not only keep Linda's legacy alive, but we can nurture the new generation of filmmakers who are in diapers right now, who are holding pencils right now, or who are holding their cell phones to try to capture this moment. Thank you all so much for coming. Happy Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. And as we go, one last how's it for Linda. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. How's it? Yeah.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you all. Love you all.
Bye. Hi, Daniel.